The American political system is based on a solid foundation of free elections. Thousands of elective offices in the U.S., some are easier to fill than others. The higher the office and the more prestige attached to it, the greater number of candidates who will want to run for it. In this chapter, we'll take a look at campaigns and elections. We'll start with people who run for office. Though they may appear glamorous at times, campaigns are really long journeys filled with obstacles. Presidential hopefuls need to raise sufficient funds for each step. They need to create an organization, tour the neighbor, participate in primaries, and if they win the nomination, finance a very expensive national presidential campaign. Who is eligible to run for office? Formal requirements involving age, residence, and citizenship of political candidates are detailed in the Constitution and vary based on the office. Residency requirements are common for legislative positions. Some offices have age requirements, age 25 for the U.S. House, age 30 for the U.S. Senate, and age 35 for the presidency and vice presidency. Requirements for state offices also have formal qualifications that are found in state constitutions. So who runs? While anyone can run, despite minimum legal qualifications, not all segments of the general population are equally represented in political office. Majority of office holders are white, male, and relatively well off, and until the 1900s were really from Northern European and Protestant backgrounds. But following the 1960 civil rights legislation, the number of African American office holders increased, and in 2008 the nation elected the first African American president. For women, traditionally only state or local positions were considered appropriate for women to hold. The past 20 years has seen a vast increase in the number of female candidates aspiring to office. Vast majority of Americans now say they would vote for a woman for president. And political candidates in the U.S. tend to be professionals, particularly lawyers, since they have flexible schedules to accommodate time off for campaign and holding office. Political campaigns have become increasingly sophisticated and complex with each election. The 21st campaign, all candidates have the same goal: convince citizens to vote for their candidate, and to do this they must raise funds, clarify positions, research opponents, get voters to the poll. In recent decades, we've seen campaigns become less party-centered and more candidate-centered. Before most households had television, campaigning was personalized. Voters received election information directly from the candidate, a staffer, or a party worker. But today, campaigning is much less personal, and voters get a lot of their information from the media, often through advertising, and fewer identify with major parties. It's now commonplace for candidates, even for local offices, to hire managers for their campaigns. These political consultants began to displace volunteers beginning in the 1960s, right around the time television was gaining influence. Consultants generally devise campaign strategy and overall theme, raise funds, seek endorsements, schedule speeches, manage advertising, prepare for dates or debates, and generally consultants mostly work with candidates from the same party. As you can see, there are no rewards for coming in second in an election. Candidates need to make sure that they consider their visibility, message, and campaign strategy as they compete in our winner-take-all system. Key issue is a candidate's name recognition. For well-known incumbents, strategy is to remind voters of the candidate's accomplishments and get them out to vote. For relatively unknown challengers, strategy will be to get candidate in front of voters. And for independent or third-party hopefuls, strategy must include a convincing rationale for voters to abandon the major parties. A major source of information for both the media and candidates themselves is the opinion poll. Polls are taken by well-known research organizations and media outlets, and also by candidates themselves. Campaigns conduct their own tracking polls almost daily as election day nears to see how their candidate is doing and to fine-tune their strategies. And consultants also organize focus groups, rely on fewer people than polls, but go into greater depth. They really provide an opportunity, the focus groups, to explore underlying attitudes, emotions, and anxieties in a way that a poll can't. The connection between money and elections has become a sensitive issue for American voters and politicians. As you can see, 2008 presidential campaign spending $2.4 billion and greater than that in 2012. Campaigns must work within the constraints of laws regulating campaign financing that we saw, the Hatch Act of 1939 that made it unlawful for a political group to spend more than $3 million and limited individual contributions to a political group to $5,000. The Federal Election Campaign Act, 1971, that replaced all previous legislation, and it limited what candidates themselves could spend on their own campaigns. That was later deemed unconstitutional and required disclosure of all contributions and expenditures over $100. Further reforms in 1974 and 1976, the Federal Election Commission was created, charged with enforcing campaign laws. Reforms included public financing for presidential primaries and general elections. It also limited campaign spending. The candidates who accept public funding must agree to limit campaign expenditures to an amount prescribed by federal law. Limited contributions, individuals, $1,000 per candidate per election, a maximum total of $25,000 per year for all candidates. And it also required all candidates to file periodic reports regarding contributions and expenditures. Buckley versus Valeo, the campaign reform of 1971 had limited a candidate's personal spending on his or her own campaign. 1976, Supreme Court deemed this unconstitutional in Buckley versus Valeo, and in 2006, court extended that decision to candidates for state offices. A campaign finance reform tightened the restrictions on campaign contributions between 1974 and 1976, and what that did result in the formation of a new type of group, political action committees. Those are committees that raise campaign funds by representing a corporation, labor union, or an interest group. They're very popular today as a fundraising means for candidates through the Political Action Committee. Also, soft money, another new way to get around the campaign finance reforms. It's technically legal to donate to parties for reasons other than elections, such as voter registration and voter education. That's what's known as soft money. It's a loophole that allows national parties to raise millions with no strings attached, and has done that for decades. Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, also known as McCain-Feingold Act, amended the 1971 reforms. Took effect the day after the 2002 congressional elections. Some of the key elements: law bans soft money donations to national parties, restricts ads for or against certain candidates placed by special interest groups, and increases the maximum individual contribution to $2,000. Interest groups responded to the McCain-Feingold reforms by reasoning that independent expenditures could be made during an election campaign if they were not directly related to a candidate. Many groups set up a 527 organization, tax-exempt group that focuses on voter registration and issue ads. By the 2007-2008 election cycle, campaign finance lawyers had another idea, 501c4 organization, which, unlike the 527, is a social welfare group that does not have to identify its donors or report its spending, and can ask people to vote for or against certain candidates as long as most of its efforts are spent on issues. This makes it impossible to know how much money is spent by groups and who is behind the spending. Interest groups also now wage their own campaigns with issue advocacy advertising. It's paid messaging that supports or opposes the candidate's position without mentioning votes or elections. Though promoting a politician's position seems the same as promoting the politician, the courts allow this practice based on First Amendment rights. And a critical key decision, Citizens United versus the FEC in 2010, Supreme Court ruled in that case that corporations, unions, and nonprofits may spend freely to support or oppose a presidential or congressional candidate as long as this is not coordinated with a campaign. Can also spend freely on issue ads. The only thing they cannot do is make direct contributions to candidates. This controversial ruling has been criticized as granting businesses the rights that only humans should have, and is greatly favoring Republican fundraising efforts. Let's talk a little bit about the campaign running for president. And it's really the culmination of two different campaigns, one for the primary, one for the general election. They historically take place in the first 10 months of an election year. But more states are holding their primaries earlier in the year. That encourages the candidates to start early. So the process is a long, arduous one for anyone running for president. The first primary was held in Wisconsin in 1903 to give voters some say over political bosses. But until the late 1960s, fewer than 20 states had binding primaries. Most were just beauty contests that did not actually select delegates. But after the riots outside the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, the party created the McGovern-Fraser Commission to recommend reforms. Under the new rules for all state Democratic parties, that was largely imitated by the Republicans, the majority of delegates would be chosen by voters in primary elections, in caucuses, or at state conventions, and not by party leaders. In 1984, elected officials also won the right to attend conventions as voting superdelegates.